Hello, and welcome back to the Career Jumpstart series, where we discuss topics each week to help jumpstart your career in tech. My name is Anna Kim, and I'm a sophomore at Luddy, majoring in computer science and minoring in business. And I'm also a peer advisor and the social media lead at Luddy Career Services. As a woman trying to pursue a career in tech, sometimes it can be very daunting, even in college, just walking into the classroom and seeing that it's very male dominated. But for me, it's always been about finding that supportive community, whether it be through your friends, your family, or your coworkers. And so this past summer, I was an IT intern at Trane Technologies. And being my first internship, I was super nervous, but I was lucky enough to be mentored by Rebecca Wells, who was also my manager. And she just really helped guide me through the summer and have a very memorable and great learning experience. And so Rebecca has been kind enough to join us today and share her experiences and insights for Luddy students. So to get started, could you please introduce yourself, Rebecca?
Sure. So my name is Rebecca Wells, and I work at Trane Technologies. This March, it'll be 20 years since I started working there. I actually grew up on the business side. So I was in logistics, and then I was in credit and collections, and I did a couple of sprints in different pricing roles. And it was in the pricing roles that I discovered data and analytics. And that's really where I picked up the technical piece. So that's been about 10 years. I moved directly into the data and analytics field in 2016 and moved different SBUs within the company. And most recently, I landed in IT of all places as a connection point between the business and IT and the business and data and analytics.
Awesome. So your current role right now is like the data and analytics catalyst, if I remember correctly. And so I know I asked you this last summer and you had a really great explanation. And so I was wondering if you could explain more what you do as a data and analytics catalyst and what a day in your life looks like typically.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So data and analytics catalyst, it's probably the coolest title I've ever had. I like the title a lot. Just the term catalyst makes me happy because it's implies that I am the accelerant between the business and data and analytics, and that can take on a lot of different faces. Data and analytics is such a huge space, and I find it's wildly misunderstood because it's so big. People just have troubles understanding the complexities and the various components of it. So everything from like data management, so thinking about data governance and data modeling, how we create a data pipeline for the purposes of data and analytics, all the way over into helping people in the business frame their problem, think about what questions they're really trying to answer, and think about how they want to use data to get to answers and make decisions in their jobs, to all the way into the heavy duty analytics. Like, how do you want to build your dashboard? Do you want to walk down the path of some predictive prescriptive modeling? How do you tell the story back to the business? I'm sort of a one-woman show in terms of trying to cover as much ground as possible in connecting that the business and data analytics. And a typical day is off the hook. Honestly, it's when you're covering a space that's that big, and there are like 17,000 people in commercial, and I'm one catalyst. So obviously not 17,000 people need my attention by any means, but there are a lot of people on any given day reaching out for this, that, or the other thing. So as much as I like to be a planner and I like to be proactive, the reality is that I'm sort of just taking in all the things coming at me in the day-to-day.
Oh yeah. And I remember like just last summer you would always have so many different projects going on with like different teams, and like because data is so important, you know.
It is.
And so yeah, it's interesting to see what role you take on. And so I was wondering if you could also describe I mean, you touched on this a bit earlier, but your journey into the tech and IT world and what drew you to this area and what made you want to continue to stay in like the data and analytics field.
I love this little series of questions. Okay. So anybody that would have known me years ago would probably just laugh out loud if they found out I had a master's in data science and I am like a total data geek. Math has not ever really been my friend. It's just I never considered myself technical. But as I was working through the various areas of the business, as you know, I'm really into Myers-Briggs, right? I'm an ENFJ, which means I'm very, very centered around people and meeting needs. I'm wired that way. And as I moved through the business, I began to see, I don't think I even recognized it at first, that there was this common thread in all these different positions that I was holding. There was this common thread of, man, we may need to make decisions better and we need to make them faster. And when I was in my first pricing role, I discovered Tableau and Alteryx. And they were self-service tools, meaning I didn't have to write code from scratch. It was a quick onboard to be able to connect to data and produce something that helped make decisions. It took a whole big piece of the ramp up out of the way. And so I suddenly had these tools, Tableau and Alteryx, and I was like, I can meet the needs of all these people, right? I looked around at the time in the role that I was in, I had 6 different product managers or portfolio leaders, and each one was responsible for basically running their own little slice of the business. And each month and each quarter, they would get up in front of these leaders and they would give a report out on the business. And as I watched the report out, I realized that they were all pulling their own data, which is painful in a company that hasn't paid a lot of attention to its data. They were all coming up with different answers. They all presented everything in different ways. And I began to think, man, if I'm a leader sitting on the opposite side of the table and 6 people stand up in front of me and present data in completely different ways, it's really hard for me as a leader to take in what the message is. Plus, how much time did it take those people to put that together? And what is the quality of the data that they're speaking to? And I thought we could do better. And so my partner in crime at the time and I set off to create basically a certified data set that included just about everything the portfolio leaders would need. And we built a series of exploratory analytical dashboards that allowed them to drop straight into their data, play with some parameters, tweak some things, and get the answers that they needed and take a snapshot of that data output that they could put in the PowerPoint. And slowly but surely, it started to take less time to put together, those MORs. And the data was more consistent. The look and feel was more consistent. People were really starting to groove on what they were learning from the data. And I was like, oh, this is my spot, right? Like I can be technical without being super technical. Well, it turned out that as I continued on that journey and I started popping open Alteryx, which you're familiar with, I started playing with some of their predictive prescriptive tools and realized that I had a super big gap. Because when you sit down in front of a tool in Alteryx, it's like a prepackaged tool. So you don't have to code, you don't have to start from scratch, but you have to know the inputs that need to go into whatever particular algorithm is encapsulated in that tool. And you have to be able to read the output. And I realized really quickly that I didn't actually understand what algorithm you apply in which situation, nor did I understand what inputs needed to go into that algorithm. And I certainly didn't understand how to read the outputs. And at the time, I thought that really what I wanted to do was move ahead in my career as an analyst. I thought I better go back to school. And so I went and enrolled in my master's in data science to shore up some of these weaknesses that I had. And it just kept going from there. Like I discovered that I am way more technical than I thought, and that math is not scary. It's actually super useful. And it just kept growing from there.
Awesome. Yeah, it's super cool how you turn like a business need and then you like took that initiative to collect all that data to make things easier for other people, and then now here you are just like working with data every day. And so this is like perfect to the next question I had. So what was the process? Well, you kind of touched on this, but like the process for deciding to go to grad school for data science, and then was it a difficult decision to make, and how did you go about choosing your specific program and the school that you attended?
Yeah, so I did touch that on that a little bit, which is that I realized I had some gaps, but I knew I didn't want to be what people would call a traditional quant. So the program that I went after, so I have 3 degrees from UW-La Crosse. I got a marketing degree originally, and then I went back and got my MBA. And then you fast forward another 10 years, and I went back and got my master's in data science. And the reason that I picked it is because the way they teed the program up, it's where programming meets statistics, really meets business. And what they're trying to do is churn out people that can communicate across that enormous gap that exists between the data and analytics and the business. So it wasn't just pure algorithms and math and code writing. It had this huge business component that was a third of the degree. And that's what really attracted me to it. That and they had one whole class that's centered around Tableau. So, I mean, that was easy for me, right? Because you know how I feel about Tableau. And it helped at the time because my husband was also getting his master's. He was getting a master's at NC State in computer engineering. And after I started going to school, he was like, what are you working on over there? And we started talking about it. And he was like, oh, that's so cool. So he came over to my program, and we wound up finishing and graduating together from UW. So on the one hand, it was an easy on-ramp because he was already in school. And then he transferred to my program. So I had a partner in crime to learn with. It still was not an easy decision because between the two of us, we got 4 kids. I got a full-time job. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's not a decision you take lightly. And my MBA was, they're not even in the same ballpark in terms of a difficulty. Like the master's was the first, the MBA was way easier for me to get. The data science was so much harder for me. And I could only take 1 class at a time. Part of that was because I didn't know how to code. And they weren't teaching you how to code. They assumed that you had that tool in your toolbox, and I didn't. So everything that they were trying to teach, it was on this premise that I had the tools that I needed, and I didn't. So I was fighting twice as hard in every single one of those programming courses to hold my own. It was really tough. I do think that if you want to get into data science, whether you want to be like me and you want to be a leader in the data science space, or you actually want to be a data scientist, a master's, if not a PhD, it's almost a must. It's difficult to do, but you got to get in there and you got to do it.
Okay, yeah. I remember that you graduated last summer, and so I'm just like super happy. I didn't know that it actually like required that much coding and stuff, which I guess makes sense because it's like a master's. But yeah, I'm super happy that you got that done, and now you know a lot more. And so for any people that are interested in data science and data analytics, I was wondering, what is, when you're first presented with a huge set of data where it's just like original, not cleaned yet, what's your process like for breaking this down and creating valuable insights from this data set?
You have such good questions, my friend. Okay, so all data is dirty. Expect it. Come to enjoy it, and if you don't, you're probably in the wrong field. The thing that people miss about the data is that if you don't understand, number one, the questions that someone is trying to solve for, and number two, you don't understand their processes and how the data gets created, you will always miss the mark every time. That said, if you're presented with a data set for the first time, the best thing you can do, like I have Alteryx, and yes, I know how to write Python and write R, but as you know, if I never write another line of code in my life, I'm good with that. So I turned to Alteryx, and they have a ton of tools that let you explore the data visually and quickly. And that's usually where I start. And what I'm looking for are, where are the columns that just appear to be useless? Like, how columns where I'm like 30-40% null. What good is that, right? And I'm looking at the metadata of the data to try to get comfortable with just the distribution of the data, holes there might be in the data, things that stand out as odd to me in the data. And then that turns into, okay, so you sit down with your business partner, and what problem are you actually trying to solve for? I call it framing the problem. Not like, let's not get into how you think I should analyze it. Let's get into what you need to solve for and what decision you need to make. And then we can back into, of the data set that we have, what types of questions can we, in theory, answer using that data from the pool of questions that you have to answer? And what data might we have to go get, because you always have to go get more data to actually complete the circle and help you answer those questions. And it's an iterative process too. Once you understand how to frame the problem, you understand the questions that they're trying to solve, then you typically have something to get started with. You have some sort of manipulation and cleanup that you can start to do with the data because you understand the processes, you understand the gotchas, you can write some of the business rules that turn raw data into something a little bit more meaningful and ready for an algorithm. And then you can apply your analysis, and you start that iterative process of, here's what the output is, here's what it tells me, here's what I think we can do with it, here's how I think it potentially answers your questions. And we keep iterating, because typically once you go through the first iteration and even the second and the third, they'll be like, oh, yeah. But there's this process that produces this data, and that's what's driving that behavior. So we have to take a different route. You just keep iterating through with your end partner and working until you get the answers that they need.
Awesome. So just like making sure to always keep the big picture in hand of what, like, I guess your client kind of wants based off of the data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Hopefully you were able to learn more about what it's like to work in the data analytics field. And next week, we'll continue this Woman in Tech interview where Rebecca will touch more on her experiences as a woman and the difficulties that she's faced as a woman in the tech field. That's a wrap for this week's Career Jumpstart. See you next time, where each week we will discuss a different topic focused on helping you jumpstart your career in tech. Okay, so I wanted to pivot now more towards women in the workforce.